The views and opinions expressed in this video are those of the speakers and panelists, and do not necessarily reflect the position of the ETHOS Institute for Public Christianity and its founding institutions and organizations.
Bioethics,
law, euthanasia,
consumerism,
politics, terrorism,
globalization,
religion,
migrant population,
interfaith, drug addiction.
Now, many people recognize that Jesus is one of the most influential figures in human civilization. Approximately 2 billion people today worship him as God. And it is from his birth that most of human race dates its calendars. So his existence split human history into BC and AD. Countless schools and hospitals have been founded in his name. And multitudes of world leaders, philosophers, charity workers, artists, and composers have been inspired by him. But who is Jesus? Now, different people have different views about this question. Some people think that he is a failed Messiah. Others think that he is merely a man who is very conscious of God. Some people think that he's a religious fanatic, a Jewish holy man, a religious mystic, a social revolutionary, a philosopher, a Jewish prophet, and of course, many scholars would also argue that he is God incarnate. Now, as Christians, we shouldn't be too surprised that there have been so much controversy about who Jesus is. Because controversies about Jesus were already present during Jesus' time, according to the Bible. When we turn to Matthew chapter 16, verse 13, Jesus asked his disciples, "Who do men say I am?" And the disciples said, some say you are John the Baptist, some say you're Elijah, others say that you're Jeremiah or one of the prophets. So when we read the Bible, we realize that the different views about Jesus, the controversies about Jesus had already existed right at the beginning. And Jesus' reply to the disciples is that, "But who do you say I am?" And this is a question that each of us have to answer as well. And our answer to that question is of ultimate importance, I will argue. Now, how did the worship of Jesus begin? How did this human figure of Jesus, right, a Jewish preacher, become regarded as God? Right? Now, this is an extremely important question for religious studies, for secular religious studies. And again, this question is controversial, and there exist different types of theories. Some scholars propose that the worship of Jesus developed fairly early in the history of the Christian movement. According to this theory, the Gentile Christians, influenced by their pagan Hellenistic traditions, began to worship Jesus, and this in turn influenced the views of the Apostle Paul, through whom the worship of Jesus spread widely. And let us call this view the early evolutionary theory. And another theory proposed that the worship of Jesus began as a result of pagan influence, but it didn't happen so early, not before the time of Apostle Paul, not during the mid-1st century, but it happened somewhere later towards the end of the 1st century, during the time when the Gospel of John was written. And we can call this view the later evolutionary theory. And then there are other scholars who disagree with these views and think that it's not a result of pagan influence, but an extension of trends within Judaism itself. And some think that this development happened fairly early, and we might call this the early unfolding theory. And there are other scholars who think that it happened later, towards the end of the 1st century, and we might call this the later unfolding theory, which is held by the well-known scholar James Dunn. Now, finally, there are other scholars who argue that there's no development, no evolution, no unfolding, but rather the worship of Jesus started right at the beginning of Christianity, very soon after his crucifixion. And we might call this the explosion theory. And this theory is held by some very well-known scholars, such as Richard Bauckham, Larry Hurtado, and N.T. Wright. And this is the view that I agree with. Not simply because I think that it is most consistent with the Bible, but I think that this view has the best evidence to support it historically. Now, when we go to the National Library or visit the secular bookshops in Singapore, or when we do a simple search on Google, on the internet, we will realize that there are various books, various articles which talks about all these various theories, which I mentioned just now, about who Jesus was and how did the worship of Jesus begin. And one of the most popular books in recent years is written by a well-known skeptical scholar called Bart Ehrman. And this book is titled How Jesus Became God. And Bart Ehrman, he argues that Jesus was just a man, just a human being. He was born normally, there was no virgin birth, he was born as he was just a human being. But he was divinized as God by the early Christians, right? So the early Christians made him into a God. So what are Ehrman's arguments? Okay, so let me introduce them. Now, Ehrman's arguments is quite unique because he combines aspects of the evolutionary theory and the unfolding theory. So he tried to synthesize these different theories. And Ehrman observes that there had been deification of humans, such as Julius Caesar, Caesar Augustus, and Apollonius in the polytheistic Greco-Roman world. Right? In fact, such deifications are quite common, right, in the Greco-Roman world. It's also quite common in other cultures, such as the ancient Chinese cultures, right? People deify heroes, and in the Indian cultures, it's quite common actually throughout the world. Now, many Christians would respond by arguing that this is irrelevant to the beginning of Christianity, because the earliest Christians are not polytheists. The earliest Christian leaders, including the 12 apostles and Apostle Paul, they were Jews, right? And the Jews, unlike other cultures, unlike the Greco-Roman culture, the Jews were monotheists. They were not polytheists. Okay? And so to use the deification of human beings in the Greco-Roman culture will be irrelevant to explaining the origin of divine Christology. However, Ehrman claims that the ancient Jews also regarded the human and divine as two continuums that overlap. Okay? So Ehrman argues that no, it's not the case that the ancient Jews are all monotheists. In fact, the distinction between God and human is quite blurred in ancient Judaism as well, Ehrman would claim. Ehrman argues that there are examples of deifications and worship of humans in the ancient Jewish world. And this can be seen in ancient Jewish texts, where we find Adam, Jacob, Moses, Enoch. These people were worshipped by the Jews, he argues. And even within the biblical text itself, we can see the adoption of leaders and kings as God's sons. And humans are also called gods in the Bible. And I have listed a number of texts here that is cited by Ehrman. Next. And I will just highlight one of them, which some of you might be quite familiar with. The text is found in Psalm 82, verse 6. This text was in fact cited by Jesus, if you remember, in John chapter 10, right? It says that, I say that you are gods, okay? Children of the Most High, all of you. Okay, so Ehrman will point to this text to say that, who are you referring to here? And biblical scholars agree that this verse is speaking about the leaders of the people, right? Calling them gods. So these are human beings, which are called gods. And so Ehrman will argue that the distinction between human and gods is quite blurry. Even humans are also called gods in the Bible, he says. And when we look at those extra biblical texts, the evidence is even more obvious, it seems. So Ehrman points to this text, which is found in the book of 1st Enoch. Okay, it's an extra biblical text written around the 1st century BC. And in 1st Enoch, we see the mentioning of this person called the Son of Man. According to the book of Enoch, the Son of Man, which is mentioned in the book of Daniel, chapter 7, if you recall, right? So who is this Son of Man? He's really a mysterious figure, right? When we read the book of Daniel, right? He's a very mysterious figure, and he was worshipped by other people. But who is he? Well, the author of the book of Enoch thinks that this Son of Man is actually Enoch, right? Who is also another mysterious figure in the Bible, right? The Genesis says that he walked with God for a period of time, and then he was taken away. It seems that he didn't die, right? So a lot of people speculate about what became of him, right? And this speculation is evident in 1st Enoch, which says that this Enoch, son of man, was named in the presence of the Lord of spirits, and all who dwell on earth will fall down and worship before him. Okay? So there's evidence of worship of Enoch, according to Ehrman points to this text as evidence. Next. Now, Bart Ehrman accepts the crucifixion of Jesus in AD 30 as a historical fact. Okay? So in fact, the crucifixion of Jesus is accepted by almost all historians, whether they are Christians or non-Christians. Almost all historians in the world today would agree that this is a historical fact. Right? So Jesus really existed. Right? Jesus is not just some legendary figure. He's a real historical figure who is testified not only in the earliest Christian sources, but also by early Roman and Jewish sources. So there's no doubt that Jesus really existed and that he was crucified in around AD 30. But the crucial question is, how did this crucified person become regarded as God? Okay. Now, this is Ehrman's explanation. Ehrman thinks that Jesus himself never said that he's God. Okay. So he thinks that the biblical accounts, especially in the Gospel of John, in which Jesus says that I am, those sayings, Ehrman would think that those are not historically accurate. Ehrman thinks that Jesus regarded himself as just a prophet, okay, a prophet. But what happened after the crucifixion? After the crucifixion was that the earliest Christians experienced visions of Jesus, which Ehrman thinks are probably hallucinations. Okay. Visions of this resurrected Jesus, and came to regard Jesus as adopted by God. Okay. Adopted by God as his own son. And Ehrman calls this view exaltation Christology. So Jesus was just a man, according to Ehrman, and then he became exalted as God. Okay. Theologians traditionally refer to this view as adoptionism. Right? So Jesus was a man who was adopted as God. Now, this is an early heresy, according to most Orthodox theologians. Now, Ehrman observes that in 42 BC, before Christ, the Romans have deified Julius Caesar. Right? Caesar was murdered, and the Romans afterwards made him into a god. And Octavian, who succeeded Julius Caesar, was not Caesar's actual son. He was an adopted son. Okay, so Caesar adopted Octavian, and Octavian succeeded Julius Caesar, and he was declared as God's son. Okay. And Ehrman thinks that the early Christians subsequently called Jesus the Son of God in order to compete with Octavian. Okay. So Ehrman thinks that the early Christians thought that, okay, so the Romans have their own Son of God, then we should also have our own Son of God. Okay, so we will say that Jesus is the real Son of God, and Octavian and the subsequent Roman emperors, they are not actual sons. They are not the real sons of God. Jesus is the real Son of God, and that was how Ehrman thinks that the divinization, the worship of Jesus began. Okay, so Ehrman thinks that Jesus began as a human being. After his death, the people have visions of him and thought of him as being adopted by God, and then they come to refer to him as God's son, and it gets higher and higher and higher. Eventually, people start to worship him as God. Okay, so. According to Ehrman, that's how the worship of Jesus began. Now, I mentioned previously that many scholars disagree with Ehrman's arguments and conclusions. In my forthcoming book, The Origins of Divine Christology, which will be published by Cambridge University Press later this year, I examine the debates between Ehrman and his critics, and I also accessed the views of other scholars, a wide range of other scholars as well, and contributed new arguments to the discussion. Okay, so now So let me just briefly introduce what I talk about in my book. The first chapter of my book introduces different theories concerning the origin of divine Christology. And then I argue that the highest Christology, the Christology which regard Jesus to be the creator of the universe, okay, this highest Christology was present among the earliest Christians. And I presented the evidence. In chapter 3 and 4, I replied to objections to this view. And in chapter 5, I argued that the extent of highest Christology was widespread among the earliest Christians. And I argue in chapter 6 that the best explanation for the origin of this widespread conviction among the earliest Christians that Jesus is God, that he is the creator, that he is truly divine, is because Jesus himself claimed to be divine and that he showed himself to be divine through his miracles, his sinless life, his and most importantly, his resurrection. Okay? So, in a nutshell, this is my argument in my book. As you can see from the outline of my book, there are two key questions that we will need to address in our assessment of the debate concerning whether Jesus is God. The first question is, what did the earliest Christians believe about Jesus? Okay. Did the earliest Christians think that Jesus is just a man who was adopted as God's son, as Ehrman thinks? Or did the earliest Christians, in fact, regard Jesus as God became man? So it's not man become God, but God became man. Okay, so what did the earliest Christians believe about Jesus? This question is of crucial importance, and we shall address this question tonight. The second important question that we will need to answer is, given that the earliest Christians regarded Jesus as God became man, we want to ask what caused them to come to this belief. Okay? What made them think that Jesus is God became man? Okay? So I shall address this question tomorrow night. Okay? So for tonight's talk, we will just focus on the first question. Okay? What did the earliest Christians believe about Jesus? Okay? Now, Ehrman is not, I don't want to say that everything that Ehrman said in his books are wrong. Okay? In fact, there are some things that he said which is correct. Okay? And one of them is this. Okay? Ehrman is correct to point out that there are different uses of the word God. Okay? The Hebrew word for God is Elohim, the Greek word is Theos. There are different uses of the word Elohim and Theos in ancient Jewish and Christian literature. For example, the words can be used for God, Yahweh, the God of Israel, and the word can also be used for humans, as we have seen, right, from the examples that Ehrman cited, which I mentioned earlier. And therefore, the important question is to ask, in what sense the early Christians thought of Jesus as God? Okay. Now, this is an important question. So merely saying that, okay, the earliest Christian agree that Jesus is God, this does not settle the debate, okay, because the word God can mean different things. You see what I mean? Okay, so the important question to ask is, in what sense do they mean that Jesus, in what sense do they regard Jesus as God? Okay. I shall use the terms truly divine to denote being on the creator side of the creator-creature divide, and of equal ontological status as God the Father. Now, what I mean by creator-creature divide is this. Okay, I'm going to argue later on that that there are many Jews and the earliest Christians hold to this division between creator and creature. Okay? And this divide is very important for them. Okay? So there's a sharp distinction between creator and created things. Okay? And I'll use the word truly divine to mean on the creator side of the divide. Okay, it means that someone is a creator. Okay, and I'll argue that they regard Jesus as to be on the creator side of the creator-creature divide, and of equal ontological status. It means of the same nature, of the same properties as God the Father, which is the highest possible Christology. Okay, so I will use the word highest Christology to label this view, the view that regards Christ as such, okay, to be on the creator side of the creator-creature divide. Now, okay, let me go on to talk about the problems with Ehrman's arguments. The first thing we can point out is that the so-called deifications of Adam, Enoch, Moses, etc. in Second Temple Jewish texts are not analogous to the origin of divine Christology. Why? There are two reasons. First, these are merely literary speculations. There is no evidence of religious organizations that were set up to worship Enoch or to worship Adam in the ancient world. Okay? So this is unlike the case of earliest Christianities, where we see that there are actual churches, right? There are churches that were founded in Corinth, in Rome, in various places. There are actual churches which are set up to worship Jesus, and that they were people who actually worship Jesus. So there was actual practice of worship of Jesus in earliest Christianity. Whereas there isn't any evidence of actual worship of Enoch or all those other people in the ancient world. So those things that we read in the book of Enoch, right? For example, these are just literary speculations. It's just like people today, they can imagine all kinds of things, right? They can write a story about Darth Vader or whatever, and say that, imagine that he has some superpowers, But nobody take it seriously that, that Darth Vader actually existed, that he really had these superpowers, right? So it's questionable whether any ancient Jews seriously believe that Enoch actually became God, and they actually worship him, set up an organization to worship him. We don't find any evidence of this. Okay, so this remains just as a speculation, right? People, their minds are too imaginative, too active, and they imagine all kinds of things that happened to Enoch after he was taken away by God. So this is the first point. Now, the second important point, which Ehrman didn't mention, is that even within these literary speculations, people like Adam, Enoch, Moses, etc., they were not regarded as the creator of the universe. They are just human beings, okay, whom, according to these speculations, become some kind of persons who were worshipped, right? But they were not the creator of the universe. So they were on the creature side of the creator-creature divide. Okay? This is the second important point that Ehrman didn't mention. Whereas when we read the early Christian text, we realize that Jesus is on the creator side of the divide, as I shall show later on. So when we look at the early Jewish and Christian evidence, we would see that, well, some Jews might have compromised in their faith. Okay? Most ancient Jews insisted on worshipping the creator only, God the creator. Even though they might use the word gods, right, for some human beings, but they don't actually worship them. Okay? They only worship the creator, Yahweh, the God of Israel, to the extent that Tacitus, the Roman historian, could say that the Jews conceive of one God only. Okay? And so it's very important to clarify in what sense monotheism means, right? So Ehrman will argue that it's very misleading to use the word monotheist for the ancient Jews, because he says that the human beings are also called gods, right? So there are many, many gods, right, in ancient Judaism. Nevertheless, we can still affirm this monotheism in the sense that in actual practice, the Jews only worship one God, okay? Yahweh, the God, the creator. They don't worship other human beings, okay? So in that sense, it is still correct to say that the Jews are monotheists, okay? In this particular sense. And this is of crucial importance to clarify the confusion that seems to exist in Ehrman's mind. Okay, so we see this in various texts in both within the Bible and outside of the Bible. So, for example, in the Psalms, we read that, "For great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised. He is to be revered above all gods. For all the gods of the peoples are idols. But the Lord made the heavens." Okay. So, in this passage, we see that the Jews, they regard God as worthy of being praised. Why? Because he is the creator. Only he is the creator. Okay? And that's what set him apart from everything else. Okay? So only the creator is to be worshipped. Now, in Psalm chapter 2, verse 7 and 82, verse 6, etc., in those passages cited by Ehrman, now these passages declare the leaders of the people, the Israelite kings, as God's sons, or even Elohim or lords. Now, why do these passages say that? Well, the reason why they say that is because, according to the ancient Jewish thought, humans can represent God in some sense. Okay? Humans can represent God to govern the world. Okay? And that's why sometimes they are called gods in that sense. Okay? And that is consistent with the biblical teaching that humans are made in the image of God. Right? So humans are made in the image of God. What that means is that humans can represent God to govern the world. But we don't see this text as claiming that these humans are the creator of the universe, right? They don't claim that they are the creator. And therefore, these passages are not analogous to the origin of highest Christology. They do not acknowledge any of these humans as creator of the universe. And therefore, well, there are different sense of the word God. The creator-creature divide remains clear. Okay? So I think this should be very clear in our mind when we look at the debates concerning earliest Christology. And therefore, the crucial question that we need to answer is, did the earliest Christians hold to this divide between creator and creature? And the second question is, on which side of the divide did they regard Jesus Christ to be? Okay. So these are the two crucial questions, which Ehrman didn't actually discuss very well in his book. He kind of skimmed over it. Okay? So in order to know what the earliest Christians believe, it is important to look at Paul's letters. Okay? And this is the next important point. Why? Because Paul's letters are widely regarded by scholars, including non-Christian scholars such as Bart Ehrman, to be the earliest Christian writings that we have. Okay? So according to almost all scholars, including secular historians, Paul's letters were written in around AD 50 to 62, approximately 20 to 32 years after the death of Jesus. Okay. And these letters are addressed to Christian churches already established by the AD 50s. And they incorporated Christian traditions of beliefs and practices from still earlier years. Okay. So remember that Jesus was crucified around AD 30, right? So this means that this is before AD 50, before AD 40. It's very, very early evidence. It's the earliest evidence that we have about Christianity. So during that time, between AD 30 to AD 62, during that time, many people who have actually seen Jesus are still around, right? Those eyewitnesses are still around. Okay, so this is very important early evidence written during the time when eyewitnesses are still around. So in Paul's letters, we see the beliefs of the earliest Christians. And we also observe that Paul's acquaintance with these beliefs and practice is not only early, but also very wide. So Paul was very well traveled. He went to different places around the Middle East and the Mediterranean. He was very well traveled. So he was very well acquainted with the beliefs of early Christians. And he was also he also knew other early Christian leaders, such as Peter, James, and Barnabas. Okay. So by looking at Paul's letters, we can have a glimpse into the world of the earliest Christians. We can know what is it that they believe. Okay. And so from Paul's letters, we see that the earliest Christians emphasize the oneness of God, okay, that God is one. Okay. And we also see that the earliest Christians, they reject idolatry. Okay. They condemn idolatry. And this passage in Romans chapter 1, verse 18 to 25 is very important for the debate. This passage mentions that the pagans exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worship and serve the creature rather than the creator. Right? So we see that the creature-creator divide is very clear, right, in this verse. And this reflects the views of the earliest Christians. For the earliest Christians, that we should only worship the creator and not the creature.